Greetings, Year 9. You'll remember that in 1984, Orwell said you should deplore things like surveillance, government brutality, religious control, loss of individualism, all of those dystopian themes. Today, we're going to look at those themes, but how they're expressed in a new story called The Handmaid's Tale. First, some revision. Last term, you looked at the word ostracized, and I'm sure you'll remember that it means excluded from a community or group. But what groups do you think are ostracized today in our society? Think of it from a religious perspective or sporting perspective, or perhaps a political perspective as well. There's been some rumpus in America, and there's some one half of the country is upset that the other half won the elections. Think about what groups are ostracized. Um, Censorship, then, clever word. If you watch a movie, at the beginning of the movie, there are details that describe how the age limit has been increased or decreased according to how much of the film, the original film, was left in. Um, if it's been cut, then that's a form of censorship, which is the restriction or banning of part or all of a book, film, news, etc. Judged unacceptable. In 1984, yes, there's censorship. Emmanuel Goldstein's The Book is banned because it contains rebellious thoughts. And in today's story, there's going to be a form of censorship as well in the news. You need to do two things today. Oh, before then, why might a totalitarian government rely on censorship? Basically, why censor? What does the government gain from it? Think about its impact on people's behavior, people's knowledge. Oh, remember those who know the least obey the best. And how do religious beliefs lead to people being ostracized? There's another question. How do religious beliefs lead to people being ostracized? I suppose that links to the first question. You're going to look at how a woman called Margaret Atwood, a brilliant author, she's alive today, so we call her a contemporary writer, includes dystopian themes and how she conveys the horror of off-red situation. Rather a lot to do, really. You have to fill out a table, which we've sent you, and which I'll show on another screen, and then write a mini PEE on horror, similar to the fear and tension ones, really. So let's talk about The Handmaid's Tale. Um, these are basically women who, handmaids are women who have to give birth to the children of, they have, yes, they have to give birth on behalf of wealthy yet infertile couples. So it's a story in life. The Handmaid's Tale is the story of life in the dystopia of Gilead, a totalitarian society. Gilead um, is based in America. It used to be Massachusetts in the United States, and you'll remember from having read that witch play, The Crucible, that Salem, Massachusetts, is this Puritan heartland. So Margaret Atwood, her argument actually is that America is still a Puritan totalitarian state. It is today, and it's just been overlaid with politics and rhetoric. But fundamentally, it's still this really conservative state, and she places those Puritan thoughts into this place called Gilead, which is a new name for Cambridge, Massachusetts. So it's symbolism. Massachusetts is where America began. It's where the ship, I think it's called the Mayflower or something, landed, and it's now where this fundamentalist regime that treats women as property of the state is based. Due to the drop in fertility rates, in this new regime, any woman still capable of having a child is brainwashed and given to a rich family who are supported of the government. the woman is forced to have the man's child without her consent, and then forced to give the baby up to him and his wife. And apologies for the typos. Um, yeah, so it's a comment on climate change because Margaret Atwood, she wrote that no story of her creation has never happened, has has never not happened in the world already, or is happening currently. So in America and Brazil, perhaps the Philippines as well, state those are governments that are quite strict on women's rights, women's freedoms, to do what they want with their babies, their bodies. A little touch on Margaret Atwood then. So she's Canadian. She worked as a teacher and she's written a few novels. And The Handmaid's Tale from the 80s it's a sort of dystopian science fiction, but as she says and as she stresses, is based on what she's witnessed happening in the world around us. So it's a realistic, speculative novel. It's written due to rising conservatism, religious fundamentalism, and finally, it shows the consequences of a government run by religious fundamental beliefs. So again, her argument is that there's still this Puritan belief in America where I think a lot of states are voting to outlaw abortion, for instance. Girls can't really do what they want with their own babies' bodies. So the five types of story, according to Margaret Atwood, isn't she clever? She says there are realistic novels, basically novels set in the present day. There are things called wonder tales, which is um, novels about set in the current day, but including strange demons like possibly Frankenstein or Dracula. Are fantasy novels. Lord of the Rings would be a fantasy novel, Narnia, that sort of business. There are also transformational stories. This is where you have somebody who changes into something um, uh, diabolical. So the story looks normal, but then it transforms. I would say Jekyll and Hyde is a transformational story. She is writing what's called a sci-fi, a dystopian sci-fi stories. Now, there are two types of sci-fi. There's the fantasy sci-fi, basically stories that are unlikely to happen, like the time travel, for instance. But she writes a story that either is likely to be true one day or is true already. For instance, Brave New World, this is about genetic engineering, cloning. Uh, I was just reading about rats who who can have their genes replaced, so they only give birth to male rats in order to exterminate the species. Of course, we read about 1984. Yeah, telescreens exist in one shape or form today, don't they? We can be heard by uh, those devices you have in your home that can voice activated. And also in The Handmaid's Tale, yes, Margaret Atwood is writing about global warming and how that leads to the loss of fertility and this oppression and this control over women's reproductive rights. The ones who can give birth become handmaids, and they are the women in red. They're, they're dressed in these loose clothes because they have to live a pure, virtuous life, almost like nuns, with the de facto mother superior called Aunt Lydia in the middle, looking after them and making sure they behave. Of course, their movements are monitored. They can't speak. They can't really communicate with men. And the only relationship they have really is with the wealthy families for whom they are to give birth. So over on the left is the United States. What did Margaret Atwood say about the States? Well, they have a lot of states who are voting for uh, reduced low levels of rights for women. And in Brazil, I think there's very little contraception. In fact, sterilization is the main form of contraception. That's where girls have the right to, the ability to give birth removed altogether. So Margaret Atwood is dramatizing things that are going on today, control over women's bodies by an authoritarian state. And again, she says America is still this Puritan theocracy. Theocracy is a place governed by um, on religious rules. So you're supposed to read the first extract of The Handmaid's Tale. In this extract, the narrator Offred, because she's Fred's wife, women's names are removed along with their rights, tells us about how Gilead seized control of the USA. And we're supposed to identify dystopian elements or conventions of this extract. And here are our old friends, the dystopian elements: environmental destruction, nuclear disaster, and so on. I'll put them in a table for you in a moment. So I think it's time to start reading. We don't really need the human rights today. That's the table that you're supposed to look at or complete with these. And then, do you want to see the sentence I need you to ask? Describe how Offred presents the horror of her situation. So let's leave this program and go over to the extract, which you have anyway. And let's try to find the extract again. Let's try and fail again. Yes, here we are. So a couple of pages. Let's enlarge it. So the story follows a woman who's telling the narrator. She's telling the story about how she used to be free. She used to have a job, but suddenly she was told she was fired, didn't have any money left, and had to be obedient to this new form of government called Gilead. So she says that having a job and freedom is like remembering the paper money. Some argue that this is happening at the moment. That there's people are relying more on card. I'm speaking to my cousin, and she says that she never actually spends paper money. She lives in America, but paper money in this age is now a thing of the past. It was after the catastrophe when they shot the president and machine gunned the Congress and the army declared the state of emergency. They blamed it on the Islamic fanatics. That's a form of doublespeak, isn't it? Very dystopian or Orwellian. And then the government suspended the constitution. A constitution is a list of laws, almost rights that every person should expect in a society. And so people stayed at home at night. Look out, said Moira to me over the phone. Here it comes. Here what comes? I said, you wait. They said, they've been building up to this. It's you and me up against the wall, baby. She's quoting an expression of my mother's, but she wasn't intending to be funny. Look at this. Newspapers are censored. Look at that information control. The roadblocks began to appear, and identity passes. This is a form of control as well, where you have to account for your identity and movements at all times. Interestingly, cigarettes are banned. Most forms of pleasure are banned. She's in the shop here. I drummed my fingers on the counter, impatient for a cigarette, wondering if anyone had told him something could be done about those pimples on his neck. She's in a shop here, trying to buy cigarettes, and her card is blocked. Sorry, he said, the number's not valid. She says, that's ridiculous. She tries again. She tries again and again and again. The system had failed up before. Surely some mistake. Card declined, basically. But she has thousands in the bank. She says, although I'm sorry, he said, but it's the law. I'm really sorry. I have to let you go. So, yeah, she leaves the shop, wondering why her card was declined. And then she goes back to her office, and Tez and her boss says, it's the law. I have to let you all go. You're fired. He said this almost gently, as if we were wild animals. You can't work here anymore. It's the law. And all of this repressive regime is reinforced by men standing in uniforms with the machine guns outside. This was too theatrical to be true. Yet there they were, sudden apparitions like Martians. There was a dreamlike quality to them. They were too vivid, too at odds with their surroundings. Just leave the machines, he said, while we were getting our things together, finding out. So they're bullied out of their workplace, or the women are. It's outrageous, one woman said, but without belief. What was it about this that made us feel we deserved it? I've been fired, I said to Moira. Um, and then she says, tried getting anything on your CompuCard today. And then she's had the same problem. They've frozen them, mine too, the collectives too. So uh, there is any account with an F on it instead of an M. So an F represents female. If you're a female and you have a credit card or a CompuCard, then it's been frozen. They'll transfer your number to him. Luke can use your CompuCard for you. Your husband receives all your money. They don't want us going anywhere. You can bet on that. So it restricts your freedom, your movement. The army, or whoever they were, would open fire almost as soon as any of the marches even started. The marches stopped. So Margaret Atwood said that when dictators become too powerful, then rebellions usually stop because they can throw the army in to quiet things down and silence people. Nobody By this time, I'd started to cry without warning and to sit beside the bedroom window staring out. So this poor woman has been reduced to sitting in her room because she has no money, no job, has to rely on her husband for everything. And it makes it easier to control her actions. She is going to become one of these basically human farms for wealthy couples who can no longer conceive. By this time, I started to cry without warning and to sit beside the bedroom window staring out. I didn't know many of the neighbors. When we met outside on the street, we were careful to exchange nothing more than the ordinary greetings. Nobody wanted to be reported for disloyalty. So similar to that Orwellian world where your those children report on their parents if they reveal themselves as thought criminals. So let's, they didn't want us going anywhere. Let's take this. No, they'll transfer their number to him. I'll transfer your number to him. Or two men standing there in uniform with machine guns. You can't work here anymore. It's a law. It's the law. I'll have to let you go. Yes, okay, let's take, they don't want us going anywhere. You have the following table to complete first. Just a few more minutes left. Where's our table? Here we are. So we need the dystopian theme and how it's portrayed in the extract we've just read. We glossed over it, so you might find more examples of environmental destruction. Perhaps there's some machine gun fire. And the example of government control is they don't want us going anywhere. You could also consider that to be loss of basic human rights. Oh, that's why I wanted the human rights. Anyway, you know what the human rights are. Nuclear disaster, religious control, and so on. Technological control, well, you can find something to do with the CompuCard there. So the next thing to do, finish that table, please. And then the next thing to do is to look at this, answering this question. What question? Nope. User error. Try again. This one. In the Handmaid's Tale, no more fags, no more ale. Describe how Offred presents the horror of her situation. In your description, consider how the dystopian elements convey horror to the reader. Okay, so we want the word horror in the answer somewhere. It's the law. I have to let you go. I have to fire you, my boss said. I want to work with this to present horror. It's the law. So Offred presents the horror of her situation by, there's a writing frame for you to use, by describing how the law states that she has now access to neither money nor employment. Now, I paraphrase the quotation. This shows successfully how the government has authorized the restriction of her rights. That's basically what the quotation law means. The government says no. Why? Probably to make it easier to force them into the abhorrent, that's my link to horror, life of handmaids. It's Atwood's, and my context as well, which should be in here. This is Atwood's criticism of authoritarian states such as Brazil and the USA, who placed increasingly strict restrictions on women's reproductive rights. So the first thing to do is to complete this table with the dystopian theme and the example from the text. That's identifying examples. I hear some of you are going one step further and explaining how that shows it's dystopian. Well done to you. And next is to write a mini PEE in response to this. How does Offred present the horror of her situation in the extract? And there's an example. So I leave you with these final questions and a song. In the Handmaid's Tale, no more fags, no more ale. Your body's a human farm. Life's jolly hard in Gilead. Domination is the norm.